Ladies and gentlemen, and this is the worst punishment in human history by channel Good Enough. I already watched one video from this channel, Good Enough. Yeah, I already watched one channel from this, one video from this. Yeah, this is like one of the fastest growing channel on YouTube. It was like just like I think a month or two or so month old channel with like 5-6 videos or something. It has a 500,000 subscribers already because it's like a salmonella type, the most salmonella type channel I've seen across, like close to it, right? It's like there have been others that's like salmonella but not really, but this feels very close to it. And on the topic it features, like it's not complete Sam, but it's different and it's somehow better type of way. So yeah, this is, Sam's gonna upload a video every 2 years or something, and this channel uploads like every month. So yeah, there you go. More creators like this is more fun. So I watched about like a predators, and I learned of some guy basically who's like a big predator hunter in India. There's even zoo in India after his name. Like apparently I didn't know that. What the fuck, right? How he hunted a lot of like different big cats who were hunting humans. This is about the worst punishment in human history, even worse topic. Because one thing I do know is that punishment is one thing where humans are really creative at. Anything war or killing of humans is there, humans are creative. Punishment, they're extra creative for some reason, right? Which is terrifying. So let's watch it. Remember, people, flag my next, don't forget to subscribe, so that way you can support this channel by helping the algorithm and things, and that way I'll know which type of videos to react to more. Check out the next Sunday, this is a link in the season, and yeah, let's watch it.
Let's start with the bad and slowly work our way towards the stuff of nightmares. Number 10. The Rat Dungeon. If you were alive in London, England during the medieval period, you would have definitely heard about the Rat Dungeon, since this punishment struck paralyzing fear into the hearts of even the most hardened criminals. This was a cell that was located at the bottom of the London Tower, where prisoners were shackled and chained in complete darkness. But here's the thing, the dungeon was connected to the nearby river and just below the river's waterline, so that when the water levels rose, all the rats that lived along the riverbed would be pushed out of their shelters and forced to swim downstream. This would of course lead the hungry and angry rats towards the entrance of the dungeon, where they would then come face to face with the prisoner. But to the unlucky prisoner, he never actually saw anything, and all he would hear were the soft scurries of the rats' feet entering the dungeon. And in a matter of minutes, these soft noises were in the hundreds and all around him. These angry and aggressive rats would then begin to take small bites from the prisoner, who had no way of defending himself. Now, he might be able to shake the rats off for a few hours, but eventually the prisoner would pass out from pure exhaustion. And while he slept, the rats would continue to take bites from his flesh. Eventually, when he would wake up, he would discover hundreds of bites throughout his entire body. But it didn't stop there. The prisoner was left here for days or weeks on end, depending on his crime. But towards the end of the medieval period, this form of punishment just got more and more deranged, eventually becoming a form.
This is so fucked up. This gives Geneva Convention a heart attack. If Geneva Convention was a human, he would have an aneurysm and heart attack at same time. This is not a punishment. This is like a most creative and painful execution. Like, what is a punishment? If you're gonna do some inhumane shit to kill somebody basically, or just even by through negligence, is that really a punishment? That's an execution.
Form of execution, where prisoners would just be thrown in the dungeon and forgotten about. Number 9. The rack. This was yet another punishment that took place in the London Tower. The rack was a torture device that was used in many places throughout history.
Limbs.
This form of punishment was originally designed for getting a confession, usually from criminals, slaves, or prisoners of war. The device looked like a large ladder, but instead of secure steps, they would...
Even in today's world, with all the democratic rules, any type of like confession pressure gives you false confession. That's the data we have. Like, confessions rarely works. Like, through the pressure, people will basically admit to anything, even if they are not guilty. And that's today. Back then, I know that's the asshole, that's the guilty party, put him in the rack. Does it matter if he's guilty or not? Because in the end, he will admit it. And that's how the law worked, apparently. There you go.
Actually rotate like a rolling pin. You see, when a prisoner was placed on the rack, he would have his feet and wrists tied to a ratchet pulley system, where two legal officials would slowly tighten the ropes and locking them in place, placing an increasing amount of strain on the prisoner's shoulders, hips, knees, and elbows with every single turn. This was all done to get information, but of course, a lot of the times the truth was not accepted as reality, and the prisoner would then begin to say whatever he believed the officials wanted to hear. Sometimes it would work and the prisoners would be let go, while other times they would be tortured even more for lying. When the whole ordeal was over, prisoners were usually released with dislocated joints, but oftentimes they were left completely paralyzed. That was the case in England in 1447 when a 25-year-old girl named Anne Askew would be tortured on the rack for hours and hours on end and left completely paralyzed after all her joints were dislocated. She was then carried on a chair and burned alive at the stake. All this because she read and memorized scriptures from the Bible, which she preached in private to a small group of women, which were the exact women she refused to name and expose during her torture. You see, during this time period, if you followed any religion other than the Catholic Church, you better not say a word to anybody, including your own husband, which was the person that turned her in. Number 8.
Jeez, man. How strong religion can sway you. They were like, fuck that. Even my wife just like, that's it. She's not with the God. She's like saying wrong shit. There you go, take her away. And then all that shit happens. Did he regret it? Or it's like, oh, she deserved it type of shit. Because that's so fucked up. 25-year-old. All she did was like read different version of the Bible to other people. And for that, she was tortured for days. Just imagine that. 25-year-old. Tortured for days at a point where her spine probably got damaged. And that's why she was probably paralyzed. Paralyzed. Which means she couldn't even move. And they just took her and burned her alive. Does inhuman word even... Is that even a big enough word to apply here to this piece of shits? How many... This is insane, man. Inhuman word feels small when describing something like this. It's think of worst things you can think of and they just did that. There you go, fuck it.
Keel hauling. This brutal punishment was carried out at sea on sailors who would steal or be violent towards others and would usually result in death. Keel hauling would start with a sailor having his arms tied with a rope, then looped around the entire circumference of the ship before being tied off to his feet. The sailor would then be thrown overboard while the group of men on board pulled on the rope to slowly drag him around the outside of the ship, including over the keel, which is how this punishment gets its name. But a lot of the times, the sailor wouldn't even have to worry about it, since they were dead before they ever reached it. Kinda just depends on how hard the guys on the rope feel like working that day. Not only would the sailors be drowning and getting their backs and necks broken on the keel, they were also getting sliced apart like a cheese grater by all the sharp barnacles on the outside of the ship. But if by some miracle a sailor actually happens to make it all the way around the ship without dying, one of three things will happen. 1. He would be sent for round 2, and for sure be dead by then. 2. Be freed and allowed back on the ship, where he would then slowly die to infection.
Just shoot me,
or
man.
3. Live the rest of his life single and being made fun of, since he was now fully covered in scars from head to toe. Number 7. Crushed by elephants. Now we are getting...
Now I get it why this channel is so famous. Not a single fucking... 2,000 videos I've probably made in past 3-4 years. That's how much reaction I do. It's like a vlogging thing. Every day I make multiple videos. Not a single one has depressed me at this level. And this video is not even half done, man. I need to take a break. Wait a second. I need to pause this. Let's start.
Getting to the part of the list where living is no longer an option. This form of punishment has been used by many countries throughout history, but was most recently used by India in the 19th century, which is really not that long ago if you really think about it. Your great-grandma could have witnessed one of these. What type of crimes would you have to commit to be crushed by an elephant, you might ask? Well, apparently if you failed to pay your taxes, that was good enough. And of course, stealing or being an enemy soldier was also a great way to become a tortilla. But the most disturbing case in history was when the 4th Mughal Emperor of India ordered an enormous amount of criminals to be crushed to death in a single day, simply because he was bored and needed some entertainment. The guy who forgot to pay his taxes, crushed. The man who stole an apple from the local market, crushed. The little orphan who jaywalked across the street, crushed. The man who murdered his neighbor and
Did you just say little orphan? Tell me that was a joke and not an actual account. Because now I'm gonna throw this computer out of my fucking window. What the fuck, man? Fucking kings and all them Mongols and Mughals, no Mongols. Yeah. Kind of with the same family, but still, damn. Man, this shit is getting depressing.
added his remains to a large pot of tomato soup, then fed that soup to his family and watched them eat it from the shadows with a creepy smirk on his face. He's alright. Apparently he makes a damn good soup. There are a few ways that this public execution goes down, but one thing always stays the same. There's always a guy on top of the elephant controlling its every move. And this was very intentional, as this was meant to showcase just how amazing the ruling class were. I mean, look at them. They can control an elephant. Now be impressed. The first method of execution was the one that you better pray for if this was going to be your fate. Here, the criminals would have their arms tied behind their back and their heads placed on a pedestal.
Where's the dragon?
It was then
I need a
crushed
dragon
like a
right
grape
now.
by
Oh,
the elephant's foot. Now, the second method is much more cruel. The criminal would be placed flat on the floor with their arms tied behind their backs. Then the elephants would be guided to walk over the person's body, and hopefully the criminal would die on the first go. But sometimes they just end up crushing a leg or an arm, so the elephant then has to make a U-turn and try again and again and again. The final and
In your body, your heart and brain is relatively closer compared to your length. So there's a high chance it will step on something that's not going to be fatal, like leg and hands and shit like that.
worst way is when a highly trained elephant was guided to slowly crush the person limb by limb. They would first crush the arms, then the legs, and then poke holes in them with the tusk, until eventually dealing the final blow to the head or torso. This is the more theatrical route that rulers like the 4th Mughal love to take, and made for a truly traumatizing experience for everyone. Except for the 4th Mughal. He loved it. Number 6.
Okay, seriously, man. What the fuck? All this punishment was so inhumane. It's like, did we had no concept of like empathy back then? Did nobody just felt like, what if that was me? That's not okay. Why am I doing? Did nobody give a shit about that, like at all? We just at number 6 now. There are still enough 5 left, which implying from the numbers is going to be worse than what was now.
Impalement. Probably one of the grossest and most cruel forms of punishment on the list. This has been used by a few countries throughout history, but was most recently used in Egypt in the 17th century, usually against criminals that were highway robbers, grave thieves, or anyone who would try and start a rebellion. This punishment would start by having a criminal lay flat on their stomachs with their arms tied behind their back. They would then be sliced open with a razor to increase the size of their back door. And as soon as that incision was made, the cut would be lathered with paste to instantly stop the blood. They would then thrust in a long wooden stake that was the width of a man's arm, which was sharply tapered on one end. They then begin to hit the wooden stake with the mallet, pushing it further and further in. And of course, the steak was greased up beforehand to make this process a lot smoother. And once the steak has popped out of the criminal's shoulder, head, or mouth, they were pretty much long gone. He is then planted next to a busy road, like a Halloween decoration, to remind everyone that this is what happens when you break the law. They will be left there for the entire day and removed the following morning before the body begins to stink. But wait, there's another version of this as well. You see, on some occasions, the criminals would only be impaled just deep enough to keep them in place, but not too deep that it would cause immediate death. They would do this by having stakes that had a seated position on them to prevent the person from sliding down any further. They would then be placed on a big...
They just made a slightly lethal plug, let's just call it. What the fuck? How did they know how deep to go? Did they experiment with it? Like, how deep can we go before we kill somebody? That's just okay.
Busy road where they would suffer for hours and hours, pleading to people walking by for help, until eventually succumbing to their wounds. Number 5.
Because why not?
Poena Kule
Why kill somebody directly through rather than just giving them slow, torturous death? Because fuck it, right? That's the theme. That's what we've been doing so far.
is Latin for penalty of the sack. And that's exactly what it was, just a lot more terrifying and cruel. This was an exclusive punishment for anyone that would murder their own family members. This was first seen in the 2nd century in Rome, but would later be used by the Germans in the 18th century. This all begins with a convicted murderer being placed inside a thick leather bag. But just to make sure the man isn't lonely, they would then add a dog, a rooster, a viper, and a monkey. I don't know what these animals did to deserve this, but hey, at least the evil family murderer doesn't die alone. Once all the animals...
Hey, fuck the dog, right? Why? What? Oh, we don't want him to be alone. Then, just like shoot him or something. You're deliberately trying to make him suffer. At that point, you're worried about his, like, what are you worrying about? His depression? Is that what it is?
Animals are added inside the bag, it is then sewn shut, creating an almost airtight seal. Now you would think this would be horrible enough, but no, this is just the beginning, because as soon as the bag is sewn shut, it is then tossed into the ocean. But don't worry, later on, these murderers would be given the option to either be placed inside the leather bag or be sent to perform at the Colosseum, where they can perform the act of being mauled to death in front of all of their loved ones and peers. At least they had the option. Number 4. Rats. This is one of the...
I would rather get mauled in front of Colosseum. Because getting trapped in a bag and thrown in the ocean is like one of the most like helplessness shit of all time. At least you're thrashing, running away while a bear kills you rather than thrown in the ocean like that. I don't know, it's just like, yeah.
The most sick punishments in all of human history, and it involves the use of rats. I will cover 2 of them here as they are very similar. The first use of this form of punishment dates back to 1568 during the 80 Years' War. A Dutch leader named Diederik Sonoy would often use this method of punishment, which involved placing a rat inside of a clay bowl, then placing it topside down on a prisoner's stomach, chest.
What movie? Too Fast, Too Furious. They did that, right? Like in Too Fast, Too Furious, that guy basically, yeah, the main and evil guy basically did this to convince somebody. Then put it inside the bucket, start the lighter, so rat start to panic.
Face or groin. Then the back of the bowl would be heated with either a torch or some coals, causing the rat to go into a full-on panic, trying to escape from the heat. And its only way out was to burrow into the human. Once inside, it would continue to chew and tear apart whatever was in its way, desperately searching for a way out. Eventually, the rat finds its way out of the maze and survives. The same could not be said for the prisoner. But the second method was much, much worse, and was highly secretive since it was used under the guidance of the dictator Augusto Pinochet, where he held power from 1976 through 1983.
This is recent?
They called it the rectoscope, and I'm sure you have already figured out where this is going. Yes, it's exactly what you think. They would place a tube on a prisoner's back door, then insert a rat inside of the tube. The rat would then begin to burrow its way in. These people were so sick that they actually expected the prisoners to answer questions while this was going on. Eventually, the rat would find its way in and begin to move forward to find its way out. Nobody really knows how many people died from this punishment, but we do know that a ton of people went missing when this dictator was in charge. Number 3. Gibbeting. The last known use was in the early 1900s in Afghanistan. This all came to light in 1921 when the National Geographic published this image in their magazine. This was also used in the United States from time to time during the 17th and 18th century. One notable example was in Boston, Massachusetts, where a few pirates were hung at the Boston Harbor, which served as a warning to any sailors that were approaching Boston. Now let's talk about England, since they love this form of punishment so much. In England, this was used on traitors, murderers, pirates, and thieves. But after the year 1752, the Murder Act was passed, which required that all convicted murderers must be put to death by being publicly dissected or by gibbeting of some sort. And over 134 confirmed people met this fate. The most common form of gibbeting were actually cages, and they looked like this. It was an all-steel cage that was shaped tightly to the form of a human body, which was so tight that it would not allow the person inside to move. They were then hung 30 feet or more off the floor, usually on a public road or water hole, to ensure that the most amount of people could witness this monstrosity. But I can only assume this was more annoying than anything, since every time you get thirsty and needed to fill up your container of water, you would have to deal with the dying man begging you for a sip. Over here! But the annoyance and torture of the public didn't stop there, because after the criminals would die in the cages, the body would be left inside to rot for years and years on end, with the locals complaining that the smell of death was so
Fucking
pungent
hell.
that they couldn't even sleep at night. There's even been reports that some human remains stayed inside of these cages for over 20 years, before a government official would finally remember to clean it out. Number 2. Scaphism. This was a form of punishment
The pirate thing, because of that, I know that of that punishment. I don't know why is that at number 3. There was much worse punishment below. But yeah, it's like, so you slowly die, right? I'm guessing people throw stones at you as well. I don't know, crows and something would basically bite at you. But yeah, that like decaying flesh, like that's like house for the disease and shit as well. Like, isn't that like hazardous to like people who's living there? Right? Wouldn't that attract more diseases or something? I don't know, man. This is fucked up. Oh, this is so horrible, man. Like, even kids and everybody watching that. Like, back then, it's just like, kids like, let's go watch somebody getting beheaded. Like, what the fuck? And people bitch about it now. Oh, look at the video games are making kids violent. What about these times, man? Where kids could just watch an execution or some horrifying shit like that. Which are proper... If a genuine UFC fighter today watched some kind of this kind of like a punishment, he would be sick for a few days. Back then, kids used to watch some shit like this. And we are worrying about GTA, where kids are becoming violent, really?
punishment that was used by the ancient Persian Empire on anyone that would be convicted of murder. First, the criminal would be placed inside of a boat on their
Why
back
are they smiling,
and tied down. The boat had 4 holes cut out so that the person's arms and legs would be outside of the boat and in the water. They were then force-fed large quantities of honey and milk until their stomachs were visibly full. They would then proceed to lather their entire body with the milk and honey as well. After all these steps were completed, he was then pushed out to the middle of the lake where he was completely exposed to the heat of the sun. But the sun would soon become the least of his worries. You see, the reason they fed him milk and honey was not because it was a great last meal, but because this combination causes the person to get extreme diarrhea, which mixed with the sweet honey attracts rodents, bugs, wasps, bees, flies, and whatever other animals live near the lake. After being tormented by the animals throughout the entire night, you would think that the daytime maybe gets a little better. No, because as soon as the sun rises the following day, the person inside of the boat gets another gigantic meal of milk and honey and an additional lathering. This would be done on a daily basis to prolong the punishment for as long as possible. It
This
was
is
also
insane,
well
man.
documented that the rodents would continuously attempt to burrow inside of the person through their back door. They were probably trying to get a head start on their next meal. A writer named John Sonaris wrote in great detail about one of these incidents. He would go on to say that it was one of the most horrid and cruel forms of punishment since it was terribly long and seemed to have no end in
This
sight.
is so
He wrote
insane,
about a
man.
man who survived for an entire 17 days before he finally died from his wounds. Apparently, the man spent his last few days with his entire face completely covered with wasps, and his flesh rotting away filled with swarms of parasites and worms, all while being covered in his own filth. Number 1.
This video is making me crazy, man. What the fuck? Find the most fucked up serial killer sadist in the world. And even he won't come up with this. If you tell this like, whoa, son, just chill out. Even he would be like that. It's like, let me think of what is the most fucked up thing I can do to a human. Yeah, all the type of like rodents, like wasp and shit. I'll let them eat on him for days and out, slowly torturing, killing him because fuck him. I'm seriously questioning now. Did we as humans develop empathy in just like past a century or two? Did we evolve into empathy just like past 2 or so centuries? Because before then, people were like, fuck them, just like, didn't even think about it, didn't even feel it. This is so insane, man. You think like, okay, some dictator, some king said it, there you go. But that's like, if people are against it, like even the king has limitation. You know, people are like, yeah, fuck you. Like, really? No empathy? Doesn't matter what the guy did. This is like too extreme, right? People will argue in today's world, like most countries, like even execution is wrong. At best, give somebody life in prison. But and look at the gap we have from now and then. Like, look at the level of gap we have. Nowadays, people won't even think about killing somebody, even if they did one of the most heinous crime. And back then, they would thought about the worst thing they can think of just to kill him, slowly kill him.
The oubliette. Oubliette simply
Oh
means to
my
forget
God.
in French. This was a punishment that was used in many places throughout history, including in the London Tower, which had a small and confined room called Little Ease. Not only was this room pitch black, it was also so small that prisoners could not sit, stand, or lay down while inside it, and they would be
What?
left in this uncomfortable position for days on end. One of the most famous oubliettes is not the one in the London Tower, but in the neighboring district of Warwick, inside of Warwick Castle. Here, deep underground in the castle's dungeons, is a very small and narrow cell, completely made of stone, which has a metal door to close it shut. Prisoners were tossed inside of the cell and forgotten about, as the name implies. The prisoner would just have to sit there and wait for their inevitable death, which usually came in a few days from dehydration or starvation. Now, of course, this would be the best case scenario, because in reality, most of the time there would already be a rotting corpse inside of the cell to keep the new prisoner company. The previous occupier of the cell would serve as a daily reminder of his upcoming fate. But that's not the only companions that he will have, since the underground dungeons are completely infested with rats that have developed a taste for human flesh. But wait, there's more. These oubliettes existed in many of the castles throughout Europe, and in recent times they have actually discovered these dungeons with dozens, if not hundreds, of human remains inside of it, as proof that they were hardly ever cleaned. Like in Leap Castle of Ireland, where in 1900, during the castle's renovation, a worker found a small opening behind a wall inside of the chapel. This hole had an 8-foot drop that led to a large oubliette, and what the worker found inside shocked him, since it was filled with so many skeletons that they needed multiple cartloads to clear it all out. But just when you think this section is over, it just keeps on giving. You see, there's been many stories of men who have been placed inside one of these dungeons and kept alive for years and years on end, surviving off crumbs of food and minimal amounts of water, prolonging their inevitable demise for as long
Now cyanide pills feels about right? All the spies at cyanide pill. Now you understand.
as humanly possible. These cells were sometimes even placed on ground level so they can hear the voices and laughter of the people outside, an experience that they will never get again in this lifetime.
Hey, thanks for watching. Thanks. Yay. Yeah. One thing I've noticed why this videos hit so hard, his animations is like, even if you don't feel it, it's really fucked up. Oh, small things just get to you. This is the worst video I've watched. Worst one. By a mile. Did I even react to this video? Yeah, I did like 10 minutes one. Because I was like, most of the time I was just like, what the fuck am I watching? This is animation. Oh, obviously, like if somebody made some real photos and videos, like even through like whatever evidence there, if they show that, YouTube will be just completely bomb the fucking video. It's like obliterate the video. It's like video doesn't exist on YouTube or the internet. YouTube would do that. But yeah, this is, oh my god, this is so insane. The worst punishment in human history. No empathy. Lack of major empathy. This thing makes proper psycho killers, basically, who literally damage, that they can't have empathy. Their functions of the brain is damaged so far that they can't feel anything and do fucked up things because they are literally brain damaged, literal serial killers. This makes them like think, whoa, wait a minute, man. How were people like that? How were they this level of creative? And how would like anybody not go like, wait a minute, we shouldn't do this, it's too much. Nobody thought like too much is even a question here, or to question to ask. Wait a minute, is this too much? Right? A small punishment here and there, okay, a bit small as in smaller than this, which still wouldn't be small in today's world. Like some intense punishment, sure, but not this. Alright, if you like my reaction, don't forget to subscribe, and yeah, I'll see you next time.